Good morning to everyone, and good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. It is my pleasure to greet everyone, particularly our distinguished guest lecturer at the online training in English of the non-governmental organization Ukraine 2050 on media monitoring for disinformation about Ukraine and the Ukrainian diaspora. My name is Eugene Choli, and I'm the past president of the Ukrainian World Congress, the current president of NGO Ukraine 2050, and the host of this online training. NGO Ukraine 2050 is a nonprofit organization established in Ukraine in December 2019 to help implement within one generation, namely by 2050, strategies for the sustainable development of Ukraine as a fully independent, territorially integral, democratic, reformed, and economically competitive European state. On January 25, 2021, NGO Ukraine 2050 launched the organization of a permanent international media monitoring mission, which will monitor the media, social networks, and other information resources in various countries in the world for disinformation about Ukraine and the Ukrainian diaspora. Then analyze the findings of this monitoring, and finally, take effective measures to help counter such disinformation, including by sending requests to appropriate government authorities and administrators of media, social networks, and other information resources to exclude disinformation about Ukraine and the Ukrainian diaspora and to block the sources of such disinformation. As of this day, we have a very impressive mission with 161 members from 54 countries who will be doing media monitoring in 40 languages of the world. Today, we're holding an online training in English for members of our mission. The training is being recorded and will be posted on the YouTube channel of NGO Ukraine 2050. We will send a link to this recording to all the members of our mission. Since we also wish to sensitize the general public and raise awareness on disinformation, we will share this online training on social media. This training will be conducted by a very knowledgeable and experienced lecturer on issues dealing with disinformation, namely Mr. Marcus Kolga. Mr. Kolga is a senior fellow at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. He is also the director of disinfowatch.org. Disinfowatch is the foreign disinformation platform of the Macdonald-Laurier Institute that tracks, monitors, analyzes, and exposes foreign disinformation targeting Canada. The core objective of Disinfowatch is to increase public understanding and awareness about disinformation. Marcus has analyzed and exposed foreign disinformation and influence campaigns since 2007. He writes and comments regularly in Canadian and international media on foreign disinformation and on Central and Eastern European issues, and his documentary films have been screened or broadcast across North America and Europe. He has spoken and testified in the US Capitol, as well as in the UK, Australian, Canadian, and Estonian parliaments about Magnitsky sanctions, Russian disinformation, and Interpol reform. Marcus has also kindly accepted to be a consultant of our mission, which will certainly strengthen it, and I wish to thank him for his generosity, particularly with the thing he has very little of, namely free time. I also wish to take this opportunity to thank Caisse Populaire des Jardins Ukrainiens de Montréal, a Ukrainian credit union in Montreal, for its precious support of the activities of our NGO, Ukraine 2050. Marcus, the floor is yours.
Thank you again, Eugene, for that kind introduction, and thank you for inviting me to speak with you today. I'm overjoyed to hear that you've started this really important initiative. It's important that all of our communities in the Central and Eastern European communities take similar initiatives because of the growing threat of foreign disinformation and specifically Kremlin-related disinformation targeting our communities. Again, my name is Marcus Kolga. I am the director of disinfowatch.org, and I have been monitoring and analyzing foreign disinformation for more than a decade. And as Eugene mentioned, I'm also a human rights activist and a leader in the global campaign for Magnitsky sanctions. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about disinformation and influence operations, specifically the kind that the Russian government engages in. So here are some of the things that we're going to look at today. We're going to talk about information warfare, misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation, influence operations, the agents, the proxies, and the useful idiots that promote them. We're going to look at why we're under attack, how we're under attack, and how we can defend ourselves against disinformation. Now, a few definitions before we start. When people spread misinformation, they often believe the information they're sharing. In contrast, disinformation is crafted and disseminated with the intent to mislead others. For example, if a politician strategically spreads information that they know to be false in the form of articles, photos, memes, etc., that's disinformation. Yet when an individual sees this disinformation, believes it, and then shares it, that's misinformation. So the clear definition for this is misinformation. There's no intent to harm. It's innocent. Disinformation, there's a clear intent to harm and confuse. Now, influence operations are a little bit different. Influence operations are generally organized to promote the disinformation that's created. They're quite different in that the influencers are responsible for the distribution, spreading, and the amplification of disinformation in efforts to manipulate policy, behavior, decision-making, and/or perceptions in a targeted society. So first of all, there are the agents. The agents are those people who work directly to advance foreign interests. These are diplomats and those directly paid by foreign governments. Proxies are those individuals who are aligned with and support the interests of foreign governments. These could be former diplomats, elected officials, and academics who are also sometimes paid by government-aligned organizations and private companies. For instance, a former diplomat who's given a plum position on a Russian mining company board, or an academic who's given a role on the advisory board of a Russian government think tank. These could be proxies. These proxies then speak in Western media and Canadian media, disguised in their professional roles, while dishonestly advocating for foreign governments. We've seen a lot of this in Canada in the context of the annexation of Crimea. Then we have useful idiots. These are individuals who are lured into advocating for malign foreign regimes. They advocate for those that these regimes who are abusing human rights, and they may not be consciously knowing it or doing it while knowing it. The radical left in Canada is a very good example of this, where they defend the regimes in Syria, Venezuela, and condemn human rights defenders who seek accountability for the genocide in Xinjiang or Russian crimes in Donbass, for example. Yuri Bezmenov, who we see here, was a KGB defector who ended up working for the CBC, the Canadian Broadcast Corporation, later in life. In this interview he gave in the 1980s, he describes the intent and tactics of Soviet-era disinformation and influence operations. And they're not too different from what we see today. So let's listen to what Mr. Bezmenov has to say.
But in reality, the main emphasis of the KGB is not in the area of intelligence at all. According to my opinion and opinion of many defectors of my caliber, only about 15% of time, money, and manpower is spent on espionage as such. The other 85% is a slow process which we call either ideological subversion or active measures, активные мероприятия in the language of the KGB, or psychological warfare. What it basically means is to change the perception of reality of every American to such an extent that despite of the abundance of information, no one is able to come to sensible conclusions in the interests of defending themselves, their families, their community, and their country. It's a great brainwashing process which goes very slow, and it's divided in 4 basic stages. The first one being demoralization. It takes from 15 to 20 years to demoralize a nation. Why that many years? Because this is the minimum number of years which requires to educate 1 generation of students in the country of your enemy, exposed to the ideology of the enemy. In other words, Marxism-Leninism ideology is being pumped into the soft heads of at least 3 generations of American students without being challenged or counterbalanced by the basic values of Americanism, American patriotism. The result you can see, most of the people who graduated in the 60s, dropouts or half-baked intellectuals, are now occupying the positions of power in the government, civil service, business, mass media, educational system.
So one of the most successful modern disinformation operations was known as Operation Infection and was run by the KGB in the 1980s. The objective of Operation Infection was to promote the false narrative that the United States had invented HIV/AIDS as part of a biological weapons research project at Fort Detrick, Maryland. They first planted the story in a friendly foreign media outlet, in this case, an Indian newspaper owned by the KGB. Second, the story was then quoted in a Soviet medical journal, which was then quoted months later in Western media. The story continued to seep its way up through the Western media environment until it made it into the CBS Evening News in March of 1987.
A Soviet military publication claims the virus that causes AIDS leaked from a U.S. Army laboratory conducting experiments in biological warfare.
Remarkably, the entire Operation Infection narrative was actually recycled by Russian and Chinese government media last year to pin blame on the United States for COVID-19 and was further amplified by Russian and Chinese officials. Now let's look at why we're under attack. What are the ultimate goals of foreign disinformation? In the Russian case, the objectives are similar in Canada as they are in most other Western states. They are first, the undermining of our democratic processes and the erosion of trust in our elected officials, especially during the pandemic. They chip away the trust that we have in our decision-making, the decision-making efforts of our elected officials, our health officials, and the health officials who are guiding us. The real goal is the polarization of our society, leading to a breakdown of trust and cohesion within it. Second, they try to create doubts about our foreign policy, and they try to discredit our political leaders and activists who are critical of the Putin regime. Third, they turn public opinion against our sanctions regimes that holds corrupt human rights abusers to account. And fourth, they seek to erode confidence and trust in the transatlantic alliance and cohesion within NATO. And this includes undermining support for the Western missions in the Baltic states and Ukraine. Now let's look at some of the attack platforms that are used. This diagram demonstrates how Russian government narratives are developed, distributed, and delivered to Western audiences. First, these narratives are developed within the Kremlin. They're then pushed out to state media outlets like RT in Russia and CCTV in China. They're also promoted on aligned platforms, including conspiracy theory platforms. From there, the Russians used an army of what are called trolls. These are both people who control hundreds of social media accounts, as well as programmed bots. They promote these narratives on social media. And this is how we're bombarded with the Kremlin's messaging. In the very worst cases, as we saw with Operation Infection, these narratives migrate to the mainstream. Now, here we have a very good chart that's being produced by the US State Department, outlining how the Kremlin deploys disinformation. On the left, we see platforms with visible connections to the regime. And on the right, we see where those platforms and those efforts are more obscured. Most visible on the left are official government communications. Then we have state-funded media like Russia Today, RIA Novosti, and Sputnik. And then we have proxy sources. These are platforms that seem independent, but are actually aligned with Russia. The State Department has named and sanctioned some of these. One of them even operates in Eugene's hometown of Montreal. We then have the weaponization of social media. The Kremlin outsources this to Putin's close associate, Yevgeny Prigozhin, whose troll factory in St. Petersburg employs hundreds of people who, again, control thousands of accounts and who engage in the manipulation of social media on Putin's behalf. And Ukraine is actually a primary target for these trolls. This video is what's called a deep fake. So this is actually quite terrifying, this new movement that's happening, this ability for disinformation actors to create videos, completely fake videos and images, but particularly videos, using celebrities, political leaders, their images, videos of them, and audio that is 100% fabricated. And this video that you're about to see is a completely fabricated video of actor Tom Cruise. The things that he says in that video, he never said.
That's why. Oh. It's it's a little embarrassing, you know. It reminds me, I was once in Russia, I ran into Gorbachev. He said, you know, Mr. Movie Star, are you nervous? I said, no, Mr. Gorbachev, I'm not nervous, I don't. He goes, well, remember how much a polar bear weighs. I said, polar bear? He said, enough to break the ice. It's the last time I've ever seen Mikhail Gorbachev.
What's up, TikTok? You guys cool if I play some sports? I love it. More for the audio experience. As much as the momentum. Hey, listen up, sports and TikTok fans. If you like what you're seeing, just wait till what's coming next.
Pretty amazing. It looks very real, and you can imagine how this technology can be used in the future to deceive us in the West, especially by those malign actors. Some of the other goals that disinformation actors have. One of the primary ones is to discredit and intimidate. We saw this tactic used successfully to discredit Chrystia Freeland in 2018 when she became Canada's Minister of Foreign Affairs. A narrative about her grandfather's alleged Nazi collaboration was planted by the Russian embassy in Canada and in Canadian media, and it spread from there to mainstream media. Similar tactics have been used to actually discredit me by the Kremlin's proxies and friendly columnists here in Canada. The discrediting and intimidation of activists and officials who are critical of the regime is one of those lead disinformation tactics that is being used by the Russians. And we'll see how that's being used here in this Canadian Global News report. Let's watch that.
Records labeled secret detail how cyber influence tried to ruin reputations. Subtle and overtly racist comments about Defense Minister Harjit Sajjan consistently appeared across Russian-language media in response to Canada's NATO mission in Latvia. In one case, when Sajjan attended a conference in Latvia, he was described as a large, swarthy man in a big black turban. As for then Foreign Affairs Minister Chrystia Freeland, in 2017 there was a flurry of media coverage about her grandfather's role as editor of a Nazi-controlled Ukrainian-language newspaper in occupied Poland. The intelligence documents say while domestic sources reported on the facts, pro-Russian media pushed the narrative to suggest that Freeland's family immigrated to Canada as part of a wave of Nazi collaborators.
Now, accusations of fascism and Nazi collaboration have been used against critics of the Kremlin, since the Cold War, and they continue to this day. Exactly 1 year ago, after I wrote a piece about the Soviet occupation and repression of millions of Central and Eastern Europeans and their families in Canada, Russian state media wrote a piece to discredit me, which included similar defamation, which provoked a waterfall of hate and threats against me on email and social media. A series of death threats were investigated by Toronto police, and the radical pro-Kremlin nationalists responsible for them would have been charged, but I declined. I didn't want to ruin the life of someone who'd been brainwashed by Kremlin propaganda. However, to this day, I unfortunately, but thankfully, have 2 Toronto York Region police officers assigned to monitor threats against me. As Yuri Bezmenov told us earlier, the ultimate goal of disinformation is the subversion of our society. One tactic that's used to achieve this is polarization. This CBC report by their Moscow correspondent, Chris Brown, demonstrates how Russian government actors seek to vilify the Ukrainian community in Canada using historical disinformation in order to turn Canadians against this community and delegitimize their status as Canadians. Let's watch it.
Dmitry Kiselov has a special place among Russian propagandists. He's the only Russian journalist sanctioned by Canada for disseminating what the government considers to be Kremlin lies. And for his first primetime show of 2019, he zeroed in on Canada and its 1.5 million strong Ukrainian community. They're the ones that dictate Canadian foreign policy, said the woman who's listed as a director of the Russian Congress of Canada, a group seen as being very pro-President Vladimir Putin. Kiselov's program visited a Ukrainian cemetery in Oakville. It's filled with the graves of Ukrainians who fought with the Nazis against Russia during the Second World War, which appeared to be the central theme, that Ukrainian Nazi descendants hold political power in Canada. Foreign Affairs Minister Chrystia Freeland and Liberal MP Boris Shivnevsky and his family, dressed in their traditional Ukrainian vyshyvankas, were singled out.
And it was seen as a sign of, oh my goodness, see, we told you, they're infiltrating, they're,
So here are some examples of how the Kremlin seeks to delegitimize Canadian foreign policy, specifically Canada's membership in NATO and its leadership of our operation to support NATO's deterrence mission in Latvia. On the left is an image from Vesti.lb, a very well-known Russian state-funded media platform that warns Russian-speaking Latvians that gay Canadian soldiers are seeking to convert Latvians to homosexuality. The piece uses the image of convicted murderer Russell Williams to support this utterly false narrative. On the other side is an example of anti-NATO messaging that aligns with Kremlin positions. This platform that they're published on is directed at members of Canada's military. These 2 examples have the effect of eroding trust in Canada's NATO mission in Latvia, and more importantly, our troops who are stationed there. A few other attack vectors. Right? When all else fails, the Kremlin just makes it up. One of Russia's primary false narratives is that its aggression towards Ukraine and its rapid military buildup on its borders with Europe are a response to NATO's aggression and expansion. This is a pure fabrication. NATO deployed troops after Russia first attacked Estonia in 2007, then Georgia in 2008, and then Ukraine, of course, in 2014. NATO has never attacked or threatened to attack Russia since its inception. This infographic shows how the Kremlin presented NATO's Operation Reassurance in the Baltics and Poland. the Kremlin claimed that 3,600 tanks were deployed to Eastern Europe, whereas only 87 were actually deployed. Here's another example. It's of a Russian report that used footage from a video game on Russian state television to support the Syrian regime and Russian military intervention on behalf of the Assad regime. This demonstrates that the Kremlin has no issue simply fabricating information and presenting it as fact. The shooting down of MH17 over Donbass in July 2014 is another extreme example of Russian disinformation, and it continues to be. Now, how do we protect ourselves against this? First, digital literacy, promoting good media consumption habits. The first thing that we need to do when seeing stories is to look at the sources that are being shared. Look at the URL, the address. If it's state media, it can be immediately dismissed. That means, the narrative can be immediately dismissed. There are several websites that should immediately raise red flags, conspiracy theory sites, and those of the radical left and right. On the right-hand side of your screen here is an example of one radical far left headline that was recently published about me, which I'll talk about a little bit more in the next slides. Second, also check the headlines of the content that's being shared and search those headlines. So copy the headline, search it in Google or whatever your favorite search engine is to verify if it's credible. And if mainstream media is reporting on it and there are other websites reporting on it, then you can verify that it's true. Often on these conspiracy theory sites, you'll see that they're also being published by other sites, but they're often other fringe conspiracy theory and extremist sites. And if you see a photo or a meme that seems suspicious, Google has a great function called reverse image searching, whereby you can take the URL of the image that you see, if you copy it, or you can download the photo and upload it to Google's reverse image search to see where that image has appeared otherwise, and you can also date that photo. We just, on Disinfo we uploaded a report on Thursday where we looked at images of the current crisis in Israel and Gaza, whereby certain activists supportive of the Palestinian side had used photos from 2014, from Syria, in 2018 in Gaza, and tried to use them out of context with regards to the current conflict. And so we reversed image searched those and put out a report fact-checking the photos that were being shared to try and demonstrate that were used to try and demonstrate Israel's aggression towards the Palestinians. Finally, what you want to do is check the overall narrative, so the themes that are being promoted. There are a few of these that are pretty generally used by malign actors. First is that they target the elite, often the EU, Zionists, and Jews. Second, some narratives focus on primitive values to promote division, often targeting immigrants, the LGBTQ community, and as we saw earlier, smears against the millions of Eastern and Central Europeans, certainly in Canada and elsewhere. With COVID, anti-lockdown narratives that suggest the pandemic is fake, these are going around. Anti-mask narratives, and certainly anti-vaccination narratives, which are the newest ones. The most recent narratives that we've been detecting is that the vaccine will kill us and cause a genocide. A lot of these are promoted by Russian and Chinese state actors. One narrative that I debunked just last week is a narrative that suggested that the vaccine, when you get it, will jump from those who are vaccinated to those who aren't vaccinated, and those sorts of narratives are quite dangerous. Now, how to respond to disinformation when we see it? First, we have to assess how viral the disinformation is. If it hasn't spread on social media or across platforms, and it's not being promoted by influencers, then it's probably best to ignore that disinformation rather than draw attention to it. Going back to the headline in the previous slide that I mentioned about me, ignoring is what I decided to do when that radical left sort of anti-human rights media platform run by a Ryerson University journalism student faculty member, when he promoted hate about the Estonian community and myself, I went and checked to see how many people had really shared it, and it seemed that it wasn't getting shared anywhere. So there wasn't much point in responding to it, because I think that by responding to it, it would have drawn more attention to it. I'd also say that the same of the situation last year when Komsomolskaya Pravda published this piece about me and I received death threats. I didn't want to make it too big of a deal of the death threats, because I thought it was, it would draw more attention to these radical Russian nationalists than to the issue itself. But I will say about this left-leaning paper that published this hate about the Estonian community, the Baltic community did send a formal complaint directed at Ryerson University about their employee. But just to take a position, but the complaint, of course, was, as you can imagine, was ignored largely by the university, unfortunately. If you see disinformation that does require a response, meaning that it has been shared and it's spreading, you need to respond with facts and remind your audience of your organizations and your community's values. So the 4 steps that are outlined here is first, you want to identify the source of the story, the source of the narrative, where it came from, who introduced it. Second, you want to determine how far that narrative was spread. And there are several tools that you can use to do this. I in my other lectures and workshops, I actually look at specific tools, and we can talk about these later. And I'm sure that my email can be shared with all of you, so that if you have questions and want to learn about how these narratives are spread and what tools are available, I can send those to you. Third, you want to assess the potential damage that these narratives could cause or already have caused. And fourth is what you're going to do is act. So, act within your own organization, or how you're going to act within your organization more broadly. It's always better to work with as many other individuals and groups as possible when pushing back on disinformation. Finding like-minded organizations, community organizations, this is key. Working together presents a far more credible counter-narrative, and rather than just acting on your own. And I think I'm just going to leave it there, because I think I've given you a lot of information, and I'm more than happy to take your questions.
So the way we'll proceed, in view of the fact that we can manage this, I will allow people to simply raise their hand or simply unmute yourself and ask the question. And the only thing that I would ask, so that we are not 3 people asking this question at the same time, is that if one person starts talking, then everybody else should go back on mute, and everybody will be given a chance to ask any questions you may have. So first of all, let me thank Marcus for this very interesting presentation that allows us to understand much better how disinformation works and what are the tools that are being used to disinform. Before I start the question period, I would ask Andrew if you'd be kind enough just to share the form for our online reports. Thank you. So I just wanted to inform our monitors of our mission that we will be, we've sent to all the members of our mission this form for online reports. We will give each one of you an identification number so that you can report either under your name or with using an identification number, because we have been told by some monitors in some countries that it could create a difficulty for them if they're identified as identifying disinformation. So they will be able to send those reports under their identification number if that is an issue, and each member of the mission will have an identification number. We are then asking you to send us the link to the disinformation material or the YouTube material or basically a way for us to access the disinformation material that you want to share with us. If you can send us a short explanation of this information in this material, particularly if the material is not in English, French, German, Russian, Spanish, or Ukrainian. If it's in one of those languages, we have people that can read it and assess it. If it's in any other language, we would ask you to give us just a heads up, basically a summary of what is the disinformation there, and we will contact you then to assess it and to deal with it. We're also asking you in a timely manner to be sending to us which media and social networks do you regularly monitor, so that we can also assess what is being verified. Because as some people sometimes ask me, is it important for us to monitor in our country because there's not a lot of disinformation about Ukraine? Well, it is important for us to monitor whether you pick up disinformation or whether you assess that there is none in certain newspapers and certain media outlets, for us to have a better understanding of what is happening in the country and in the media resources that you are monitoring. We're asking you then to send this, and we provide the NGO email address where it should be sent. We inform you that we will only be using this material for the purposes of the mission, and we will not identify you with any of the information that is being sent to us. So in other words, you will report to us on the disinformation, we will deal with the disinformation, but we will never associate you with any piece of this disinformation that you're sending to us. And finally, I want to let you know that on the website of NGO Ukraine 2050, there is a section called Media, where we post all the information regarding this mission. So please visit that section if you need any update on any on any issue. Usually the things that we ask you to do or share, we post them very quickly on our website, and you can then check that information. Marcus, you've said at the outset when I've said that we have an important mission. Our mission is essentially composed of volunteers. Nobody's being paid for this work. And sometimes people wonder at the end of a busy week whether this particular time that they're devoting in order to monitor the information, is it really worthwhile? Does it give anything? Is it important for us to do? What do you think, Marcus?
It is hypercritical that you do this and that you're doing this worldwide. This is something, I think it's a wonderful model that other communities should be following, because I monitor foreign disinformation on a daily basis. I see what's happening. I see the sort of narratives that are being used, and quite frankly, the Ukrainian community, as I said in my presentation, is a primary target. Whether it's Crimea or Donbass, it's Ukraine's aspiration to join NATO and EU. These are all significant targets. So Ukraine is very much, and all of Central and Eastern Europe is on the front lines of this information warfare. And the larger problem that I see from a Canadian perspective is this effort. And it's not, I mean, it's coming from Moscow, but they are using multiple platforms. They are using, as I mentioned in my presentation, conspiracy theory platforms of certainly of the far left, to delegitimize our voices in these home countries, and certainly in Canada. The smears that are being used, the suggestion that all of our families came to whether it's Canada or the United States, the UK, wherever we are, that we are all somehow supporters of Nazis and such. This is hate messaging. And at the very least, we need to be aware of where these narratives are being spread. Once we're aware of where they're being spread, the types of the narratives, we'll be better able to analyze them and figure out how best to respond to them, because we can't let these, certainly the Kremlin, the Russian embassies in our various countries, continue smearing us with these sorts of hateful narratives, and delegitimizing our status as citizens of the countries that we live in. So yes, it's critically important, and I applaud you for doing this. It's an incredibly important initiative that you've undertaken.
Thank you, Marcus. Anyone else at this point?
I have a question.
Sure.
Go ahead.
Okay. I guess could either Eugene or Marcus, could you sort of talk about or repeat what you were saying about what happens with the information that these are the monitors? They're going to send you, they're going to show you the disinformation. What is the next step? What's going to happen like with that analysis? What's the next step? What is the counter activity that's going to happen as a result of the monitors finding you this disinformation?
Thank you. Well, first of all, I think that we will determine whether it is disinformation. I think that is a crucial component. We have, as you have seen in our material, we have two teams. The first team of the mission are the monitors themselves, who do the monitoring in the various countries where you are residing. And then we have a second team of analytics that will be looking at the material that you will be sending us, since we're asking our monitors to send us material when they suspect that it is disinformation. And as I've shown on the form for online reports, for you to give a short explanation of the disinformation in this material and a short summary if it's not in one of the languages that we cover. And we will then have people that are experienced in this that will look at the material and determine whether it is disinformation or not. The next step is going to be for us to determine whether we need to react or not. And as you have seen and from Marcus, so it's not just me telling you this, sometimes the best thing to do is simply to ignore. So we, in certain instances, when we see that this disinformation is not widespread, we will certainly not be focusing our attention on it in order to give it more exposure than it would have otherwise gotten. So we will assess whether there is a need to react or not. The next step is obviously how to react. We will not get into the game that these informers want us to get into, which is try to debunk every single disinformation piece that's out there, because that's an impossible game, and that's certainly a useless game. So we will be assessing what is the trend, what exactly is being, what these messages are intended to accomplish, and we will then counteract that. So for instance, as Marcus has pointed out, regarding Ukraine, if we see that there is a lot of disinformation that is being spread in order to focus on all of the negatives regarding the EU, in order for Ukrainians to be disenchanted with Ukraine's Euro integration program, we will then focus on that, write articles, present the advantages of the EU, present in a factual, correct way. We will present the issue, explain why certain things are being done, and the pluses and the minuses of doing so. So in other words, we will debunk not a specific disinformation material, but the story behind, or the strategy behind certain materials. And finally, we will be turning to government authorities and certain media administrators in order to alert them that certain sources persistently disinform, and that they should be targeted and sanctioned or simply blocked in order for disinformation not to get the higher end in our daily lives. So that is essentially how we will be acting, Nadia.
Okay, thank you. That was very good.
Marcus, is there anything in what we planned that you would do differently, or that you would nuance?
No, I think that I mean, that's your strategy is sound. I think it's very important. Again, you know, further to your point, that you're not playing whack-a-mole, because that's what you end up doing. You know, wherever disinformation pops up, you do need to assess where it's happening, and certainly the impact of it, the spread of it, because you're going to drain yourselves if you start debunking every single piece of disinformation that's out there. Let's not forget that the Russian government has poured millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars into its disinformation efforts. So it's just impossible to address every single narrative that's out there. But it is important to present good information, facts, specifically for journalists in your home country, and certainly elected officials, so that there's a resource for them and that they are exposed to the truth. So that's very important.
We have on the chat somebody who posted that fortunately here in the UK, the BBC has set up a fact-checking unit. They debunked all the lies that was being spread about Ukrainian aggression in eastern Ukraine. And I think, again, that as we have said with the material regarding our mission, that we will be turning to other agencies and organizations, as we have turned today to Marcus, to help in that worldwide fight to expose, identify, and debunk disinformation that is hurting our daily lives.
I would only add to Yaroslav's point there about the BBC that I think the Ukrainian community in the UK has done a very good job in submitting complaints to Ofcom, which is the British news and information regulator. Just, I think it was about a month ago, Ofcom removed the license for Chinese state media from the UK. So CCTV can no longer broadcast because of the human rights abuses that were being broadcast on Chinese state media. I would urge the community in the UK to continue sending in those complaints to Ofcom, whether it's about RT or Sputnik. And if there are similar regulators in any other countries, you should be doing the same thing there. In Canada, unfortunately, the CRTC, which is like the Ofcom, is reluctant to act on these sorts of complaints. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't continue sending those complaints in. So that's also a very positive way and of reacting to disinformation.
When Marcus was saying that he agrees with our strategy to the effect that we would exhaust ourselves if we tried to debunk every single article, and that the Russian Federation is spending substantial amounts in order to use disinformation as one of its elements of hybrid aggression against Ukraine and other countries. I very often quote a statement that was made by the former US Deputy Assistant Secretary of State Benjamin Ziff, who testified, and we're talking in 2015 dollars, when he testified on November 3rd, 2015, before the Subcommittee on Europe and Regional Security Cooperation of the US Senate Foreign Relations Committee. And he stated, and I quote, "The Kremlin sponsors these efforts," and he was talking about the disinformation efforts, "with a sophisticated 1.4 billion a year propaganda apparatus at home and abroad, which claims to reach 600 million people across 130 countries in 30 languages." So we're talking of a substantial machine that is disinforming the world on issues of concern, including on issues regarding Ukraine. Patty.
Wait.
Hi. My question is, so I'm Italian, so I would be looking at Italian news. And one of the things that I've noticed in the Italian news and misinformation is it's coming a lot of the times from some of the top politicians in the country. The misinformation.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. And I know in the Italian, and you see this in other, European countries as well. I mean, right now, in Estonia, I'm of Estonian heritage. We had a far right political party in power. You'd almost call them neo-fascists, who were very close with people like Steve Bannon and such. They were meeting with Marie Le Pen and many of those on the European far right. They're ethno-nationalists, but it's quite interesting that the Russian radical nationalists, the ones that are as Estonian Victory Day parades, the Immortal Regiment, a lot of this, the ones that promote Soviet era and certainly current war propaganda, they've aligned somehow. And so the far right in Europe and Putin they're coming closer by the looks of it. You see certainly a lot of this in Hungary with Viktor Orban is also very much aligned. So, what to do about that? That's a very good question. I think that, as our communities are concerned, there's not too much that we can do, but again, making sure that the journalists that we do know have the correct information, connecting with columnists in our media to inform them, and certainly those writers who have a voice and platforms to speak from, making sure that they're informed of these narratives and keeping ahead of them. And certainly with this group, send that information to the group so that it can be assessed and it can be addressed in a strategic way.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Marcus, you were saying during your presentation that on disinformation that you identify, we need to identify, assess how much disinformation is spread, assess and act. I'd just like you to come back before I ask Fred and give him the floor, for you to give one very easy explanation for people to understand when they're monitoring, and obviously we don't have people that are doing this as experts. We have community leaders, we have volunteers, we have people that want to do something constructive, but most of them are not experts on media monitoring. What is the best tools to remember when you're monitoring one evening social media or newspapers to identify whether a piece is, for instance, disinformation, or whether it is critical on certain issues, critical on, for instance, the action of a government in any state, but is a fair criticism of certain actions? Where do you draw the line with criticism versus disinformation, and how do you identify it? If you can just walk us through that again, Marcus.
Okay, so I think there are a few questions there. So the first thing, if you're seeing some sort of a narrative, or you see a headline that's being shared on social media. So I have several listening tools set up that you wouldn't necessarily have. Every morning, I call it my patrol. On my patrol, I go and check out what's happening on pro-Kremlin social media sites in Canada, in the US, and otherwise. And I use a tool called CrowdTangle for this, and this is available for professional journalists. There's also a plugin, actually, a CrowdTangle plugin it's created by Facebook. This company is owned by Facebook. What it is on using Google Chrome, you can look up CrowdTangle, install that plugin. What that does is that when you see these narratives pop up, whether it's on state media, maybe it's something that's come up, a journalist for the Globe and Mail, or a column in the Globe and Mail is very in the Canadian newspaper Globe and Mail is pro-Kremlin. And it needs debunking. You can use this plugin to actually check how many times that story has been shared online. That is one of the most important tools that you can use, because again, going back to what I was saying in the presentation, if you find out that there's a story that says that Ukraine is provoking a crisis in Donbass, the Russian government needs to come and save the Russians from some mass human rights abuse. If it's an outrageous headline, but if you can see that it's only been shared, maybe 100 times, there may not be any point in doing anything about it, because if no one's looking at it, what is the point? You have to assess the value of debunking something like that, because you may further amplify that narrative. However, there are other websites. There's a very good example. It's a website called Global Research in Montreal, which often promotes these sorts of narratives. And I often go and look on that website to see what's being promoted. Sometimes it's not being shared at all. Other times you'll find a narrative, much like the one that I mentioned, that's being shared 500,000 times. When you see 500,000 shares of an article, that requires debunking. How you debunk it is, that's up for debate, and which strategy you might use. But that's one of the first ways that you want to assess is to find out how far that narrative is spread. You're not going to, as Eugene mentioned, you're not going to debunk every single headline on Sputnik or on RT, because not everyone is, quite frankly, looking at those sites anyway. So that's assessing the virality of a narrative is, I think, the most important way of determining whether it needs to be addressed or not.
Thank you, Fred.
Thank you, Marcus. Awesome presentation. And you just answered one of my questions, which was, how do we assess the level of sharing, likes, retweets that needs to be signaled? Just 5 seconds on Twitter into French media, and you could just plow hundreds of disinformation retweets, likes, and articles being shared on whatever. I think I found Liberté magazine or something like that really quickly. And that level, when you see pretty much a useful idiot, general person who's sharing 50 something, who's got 50 likes, 60 likes, 120, at that point, you're telling us it's not worth doing anything about that one. And then you do a deeper dive and search into who's actually retweeting, who's actually liking, and what they actually do like, and what where they're going with their sharing. I'm having a hard time gauging maybe to which level do we dive, and where can I find a list, like a comprehensive, credible list of websites, media that are just prone to sharing this. And just with regards to Ukraine 2050, it's fantastic what we're doing. But in my personal life, the people I come in contact with, the workers that I see at work, the disinformation that's being shared there, how can I help with that disinformation on that level? I think this is an incredibly useful tool. How do we bring it into our everyday lives, where if someone I know is sharing an article from a website which is not credible or just completely false, how can I counteract that without ending up in a stupid Facebook war or a messenger war or a group messenger war. Like my job, I'm the president of a union in Montreal, just Metro grocery stores, and we represent 600 people, and the amount of just stupid fights that we'll have from the far left, far right, and anything in between, where people are just going at each other's throats, sharing ridiculous articles back and forth. How can we just maybe get that general website that's recognized, that's credited, that's credible, where we can refer people to maybe just read it on their own time, think for 2-3 nights, come back with a more educated way of thinking?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I get that all the time. And I think that's one of the biggest questions. How do you approach this, especially with your friends and colleagues and such? Facts, that's it. The facts are what count. The problem is, in Canada, at least, as you probably know, is that we've seen a steady erosion of trust in media. And I think there was a question earlier about mainstream media and whether to look on there. Less and less people are trusting mainstream media and facts. And this is one of the things, when I'm looking at it, conspiracy theories are really taking over, especially in the US. We've heard so much about QAnon and how it's really poisoned the discourse in the US. Believe me, it is happening here. And Fred, I'm sure you see this probably as well. The approach that I've taken, at least, and this isn't a silver bullet by any means. And certainly during COVID, there's been more of this where you see, I've seen relatives share all sorts of ridiculous information about potential cures. There's one fairly famous one in Estonia. People were suggesting that you should go to the grocery store and buy a tub of goose fat, mix it with Coca-Cola and smear it on your body, and that would protect you from COVID. I think most of us you're probably scratching your head and going, how could anybody believe that? But people were believing it. And so, the approach that I took to some of these people, and I'd get these, private messages about these, is simply, going to a source like Google Fact Check. AFP has a fact checking site. So all of the main news gathering organizations generally have a fact checking site. And specifically with COVID related disinformation, you could plug in any sort of myth and you can be fairly certain that somebody has already debunked it and fact checked. And so sending that fact checking link to people but respecting their views, because let's be honest, especially with older generations, people who used to get their news, like my parents, from the newsstand, and you could trust everything that you could see, they've taken that trust now and imposed it sort of on social media. So my father, when he sees stuff on social media, if someone's published it, it must be true. Just like in 30 years ago, if somebody published a story in a newspaper or broadcast in television, you trusted it. There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, it's a little bit naive, but it's understandable. So respecting people, especially of older generations, when they share these things, they're not doing it with ill intent. And I think we need to respect that and sort of approach it with that. At least that's the way I've done it, is approached it with that sort of in that context. And, it doesn't always work, but it seems to work most of the time. So like I said, trying to use facts to combat it is the best way of addressing disinformation. Sadly, with, like I said, the erosion of trust in our mainstream media and certainly our elected officials, and it makes that task a bit more difficult. But anyway, sorry, it's a bit of a long answer for.
Well, it was a long question, so that's perfectly understandable. And also, like, I just went off track a little bit. So back to the original point. What do you use? I'm guessing you have extensive knowledge of this, but what do you use to identify if a website is credible or not? And is there like a database somewhere that's established that you could just go to and go, oh yeah, that website in France, in Italy, in Germany is far left, far right, spewing a whole bunch of garbage, that I can just refer people, myself, just to go, look, this is credible, and it'll identify what these people are trying to do.
Marcus, Marcus, before you answer that question, let me just point out to one thing regarding what we have with the mission, and then you may add to that. In the last notice that we have sent to all our media monitors, we have also attached a preliminary list of links to websites for monitoring. As you know, when you sign the application to become a monitor, we've essentially asked you to monitor what you're monitoring, what you're reading, and what you're monitoring on a daily basis without doing anything special. So you go through your daily routine, and what you read, you point out to us if you picked up anything that deals with disinformation. That is the minimum that we're asking all of our monitors to do. And in that fashion, what we're going to be managing is to cover a substantial amount of countries and 40 languages of the world on disinformation by simply looking at in your daily routine at social media and major media. We have also received from a lot of our monitors and a lot of our analytics in our second team requests that they're saying we don't see too much in mainstream media in our country of disinformation regarding Ukraine. Can we do something more in order to be more helpful to the mission? So for those, that's one additional step in the work. We have sent that list of websites, and those websites are connected to Facebook, to Twitter accounts, and to other forms of social media that we're asking our monitors to look at. In order to divide the work, Fred, we have sent in that notice a request for you to look at the various links that we have provided and to advise us by May 15 which ones you're willing or interested in monitoring, so that we can, at the end of the day, with our 160 monitors, be sure that we have covered all of those in that list of websites that we have provided. Obviously, as we work and with other organizations, and as we will consult with Marcus, that list, as we've called it, is our preliminary list. We will be updating it and asking for people to look at additional sites when we find that they should be monitored more closely. So that is the second stage for those that have a bit extra time and are willing to do something a bit more than just report on what they're seeing in their daily routine. We have provided that preliminary list, and I invite everyone to look, go through that list, and to send us to our NGO email that's provided in the notice, the sites that interest you and that you are willing to monitor on a regular basis. Marcus, if you'd like to add to that.
Just very briefly, I mean, it does take active monitoring. There's no, it's very difficult to have an automated tool, and there just aren't tools that will scan for disinformation anymore. A perfect example of this was just, I think it was on Monday or Tuesday. I hadn't been to the Russian embassy in Canada website for some time, and I think I was checking to look into some other links. I think about Ruski Mir or something like that, and I happened to find an incredibly dangerous piece of disinformation on their site that was promoting vaccine hesitancy with regards to the Pfizer vaccine. Because I was on the site, I happened to see it, and I immediately debunked it and promoted that as an example of how the Russian government is promoting anti-vax disinformation, at least in Canada. So active monitoring of sites is very important, and certainly creating those lists, as Eugene, I mean, I'm very glad to hear that there's an existing list that you've already compiled, but growing that list with regards to specific websites is really important, and making sure that everyone has access to it, and social media accounts as well. I'm trying to identify Twitter accounts that have large followers, large follower counts, whose tweets are amplified, that are promoting disinformation. All of that is important, but it just takes active maintenance of those lists, and so that's a very important tool for doing this. Like I said, there's no specific site that will tell you which sites are promoting disinformation. I did put into the chat a report by the State Department that was released in October, the Russian Pillars of Disinformation and Propaganda report. That's a great report. I encourage you all to read that. That contains some of the more prominent sites that promote Russian-related disinformation. I would also ask you to go to the Treasury Department, U.S. Treasury Department website. They just placed sanctions on 4 Russian disinformation outlets, and I'll try and dig that up at some point as well and put that into the chat. Those are also very important sites to monitor. So those are good places to start.
2 things. I see Pampadia. I'm not ignoring you. I'll let you speak in a second. 2 things. One, Marcus, I'd very much appreciate if you we'll send you our list, and if you could maybe take a look if there's anything there that we're missing, and if you can provide something that we should also ask our monitors to look at, that would be very helpful. So that's one thing I wanted to address. The second one is, Paul Bandrishki, you've mentioned an article that you wrote on disinformation and that you wanted to share. If you would be kind enough just to put the link to that article in the chat, that would be already very helpful. I've seen, by the way, that article, and we will share it. Yurko Kulitsky was speaking at the beginning, and we could not hear him. So, Marcus, the question that he put on chat is, if my main information consumption is from mainstream, where do I go fishing for the disinformation in order to call it out? So we already talked about the list. Is there anything else that you'd want to add to respond to that question from Yurko?
I think we've discussed, lists. We should be creating these lists of various different websites that we know are promoting disinformation. If you're RT is a good place to start. There are often columnists there that promote some very serious disinformation, and it's specifically targeted to our home countries. There's for example, on RT, there is a university in the Canadian context. There's a university Ottawa professor who's often writing on RT, and we may not be able to define what he's writing as disinformation, but it certainly is pro-Kremlin propaganda, and it is often targeting Ukraine and Central and Eastern Europe. Keeping an eye on mainstream media is also important. Sometimes these narratives come up. I've often seen, again, in the Canadian context, some of these headlines have come up in the Ottawa Citizen, in the National Post. These narratives that start out on, whether it's state media or on conspiracy theory websites or these fringe pro-Kremlin sites, they will often migrate. They bubble up through this network and through the environment, and they surface in the mainstream. So, keeping an eye on mainstream media is just as important as these fringe sites.
There's a comment, Marcus, you posted a couple of links, and Nadia has asked if we could send all those links. So Nadia, first of all, as I've already mentioned, we sent to all of our monitors a list of websites and links to look at. Marcus, if you'd be kind enough, if you could just send to me by email the 3 links so that I don't have to copy them now from the chat. And we'll send that to I think you posted on chat, if I am correct, three links. If you would be kind enough just to email them to me, I'd be very happy. Patty.
I'm kind of circling back to what Fred was talking about before with his union people posting all kinds of crazy stuff on the internet. I guess he has the same feed as me on Facebook, where you just kind of do one of these. You shake your head like every 10 seconds. I'm seeing a lot of Ukrainians posting misinformation and like actually mudding the waters, like where they kind of like buy into these little lies and spread them. But I do notice that the people that are spreading the stuff that I see, there's two types. I have two types of people in my feed. The ones that are innocently posting because they're like, oh my God, you need to know this because it'll protect you. And they actually really just care about everybody. And it's like, it's gone full circle to stupidity. And then I have the other one that will not believe mainstream media. So if I send them to an article, say from Disinformation Watch or from, say, Snopes or any other kind of debunking website, they'll just say, oh, that's just part of the conspiracy. And so you just get nowhere really fast. How can we deal with those kind of things? Because I would say that's where I have the majority of my frustrations.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, how do you argue with someone who believes that the world is flat?
Thanks,
right? Like you can't do it. You know, I remember this was in 2015. There was a federal election then. Then Minister of Defense Jason Kenney had asked for the Estonian community's help. He wanted to set up it was a press conference or something like that about 2 or 3 months before the election in Toronto at one of our Estonian centers. And I was happy to help him out. And so it was an early morning press conference around 7 a.m. The manager of this building happens to be, he's a very intelligent guy, used to be a resource manager at IBM, fairly high up, senior management. He ran up to me with a picture of a photocopied picture of the Pentagon with a cruise missile flying into it. It looked like some kid had cut this cruise missile picture out of some magazine, pasted on there. And he came up to me and said, you have to give this to Minister Kenney. And I said, okay, why? Well, he needs to know that 9/11 was an inside job, and this is the evidence. And I mean, I thought, do I like, how do I respond to this? And I just said, okay. I nodded and I folded it up. I put it in my back pocket and I walked away, because you cannot. There's nothing you can say to someone like that who completely has bought into these conspiracy theories. There are no facts that you could bring out that they would believe. So I think, you sort of have to make that decision when you see these people, whether it's even worth engaging. Sometimes it's not. And I think this is the terrible tragedy of the times that we're living in, is that so many people have bought into it. Think of the millions of Americans that believe in QAnon. They believe the fact that there are a group of elites who are going around kidnapping up to 800,000 American children and putting them in basements, scaring the living daylights out of them so that they can extract their blood, so that they can live forever. There are millions of Americans that believe this. It's terrifying. And this is, speaking to our larger theme, the Russian government knows this. They understand how these people, why they believe these conspiracy theories, the high level of emotions that causes people to believe them, and they play into that. They use that. They see that opportunity and they tap into it. That's why the work that you're doing is so important, so that problem doesn't grow.
Question, unless somebody else has one. Here, I raised my hand. One of my concerns, and this is just locally, and I'm obviously my picture is not very large. It's regarding police. it seems that this kind of information, and depending on which police department or whatever, seems to be infiltrating that type of rhetoric. Why the whole conversation about anti-vaxxers seems to be linked to gun control, seems to be linked to right or left leaning ideologies. And then let's say our police, who are unfortunately being bundled into this whole Blue Lives Matter, Black Lives Matter, all that other stuff, which ends up in the same way. Why am I having so many arguments with my friends who are police officers over whether vaccines are good or bad for them, or whether and I'm trying to make the link, especially, and those are Ukrainian people, I'm trying to make the link that often that type of conversation rhetoric is completely linked to pro-Russian propaganda, pro-Russian media, pro-Russian links, and they don't see it, and they can't connect the dots, and I don't know how to make them connect those dots, where it's like the same puzzle all the time. People will spread that information, and then it links to that. Oh, well, at the same time, Fred, gun control doesn't do this or that. And I don't want to bring him towards, let's say, my own personal position. I just want them to see the middle. I want them to see whether it's, I don't know, what's the most trusted media sites. I guess NPR is relatively useful in the States, or am I like, sorry? Merci, Julien. Sorry. So how do I bring him there, and why is it that our own police officers and our own people who are supposed to protect us are falling into this? And I understand they're just humans; they're just people like regular people like inside. You're talking about politicians. You're talking about people who are educated. You're talking about people who work in universities. You're talking about these people who come up with drawings and collages that they put together. And I remember, anyway, I could go on from that. I lose sleep over this, and it bothers me so much. And I spend so much time diving into it and trying to help people around me, because it scares me that our children are growing up in this society, and our children are going to be exposed to this, and our children are not going to watch mainstream media soon. Kids don't watch mainstream media. They just go on YouTube, and they get educated through YouTube and through whatever channel of super spreader influence or an influencer or anybody like that. These people, I'm running out of options as to how to do this, and it's discouraging and it's tough. So I understand I'm spewing a little bit, but man, it's been a tough 5-6 years. Let's put it that way.
And this is exactly why I started up Disinfowatch, was because I saw the same thing, and it's incredibly frustrating. My sort of, I guess, the strategy that drives the entire platform and what we're trying to do, and what I do on a daily basis if I'm writing in the media, is to try and explain, because you're, like you said, I mean, these are very complicated narratives. So trying to explain how, promoting anti-police narratives, or then BLM or anti-LGBTQ narratives, like these narratives that seem on the surface very domestic, very localized, trying to explain how the Kremlin and those aligned with it, how it benefits them, is very, very difficult. It's because the narratives are very complicated. And one of the things I think that you will be doing with your project, and you should be doing this, is explaining it. Who is behind those narratives? Tracing the points, how these narratives move, who they help and why they help. What is the intent? What is the motivation behind them? It takes a hell of a lot of work to sit down and try to do that. The fact is, you won't speak to all that many people when you do it, but to create those resources, and this is again what we try to do, is we're trying to create a database of all of these instances, but to contextualize why the disinformation is happening and trying to just break it down into parts that people can easily understand. That's the trick. But further to your question about why police officers and seemingly very educated, smart people are buying into anti-vax conspiracy theories, anti-lockdown conspiracy theories. My only explanation is that everyone's nerves are raw right now. So everyone is looking for, we're looking for people to blame. We're trying to look for ways to get out of this. We need explanations for why we're in this situation. And the government's not doing itself any favors either, to be quite honest. Certainly, in Ontario, we have politicians who amplify these idiotic narratives, anti-lockdown, anti-vax narratives. With this AstraZeneca vaccine, for example, the poor communications coordination, that feeds into all of this as well. Hopefully, once we get out of this, we can sort of get back to normal. But I'm afraid that our information environment is just that polluted right now that it may remain polluted. And again, to your point, the fact that our children are getting most of their news from YouTube, and YouTube has no interest in regulating any of this stuff, right? The fact that they provide, RT, a few years ago, I was able to get RT debundled from Rogers international news packages and such. But most people watch RT on YouTube, and Google is more than happy to provide this massive platform for them that RT doesn't even need to pay for. So, how do you combat this? I don't know yet, because you would think that Google and YouTube would want to contribute positively to our information environment, but because they're driven by profits, sadly, they're not always. So
it's a little ironic that they. Sorry, go ahead, Andrew.
Yeah, if I think instead of us doing the work, we should try and start at the beginning with the children themselves. Like, is there a way of maybe convincing schools or getting schools to give a class or a course how to teach kids, critical thinking, what's real, what's not, how to disseminate the information and figure out, okay, this, that they can do this themselves, because us trying to convince everybody one by one or finding all this stuff, if the
Can I interject?
Yeah, go ahead.
Because I had sent actually, Evhenna, I sent you an article about a program out in Iqaluit that they're doing up north. There's a teacher that just couldn't take it anymore, a little bit like Manfred, where we're like, just shake your head and you're like, I can't do this. And she did a whole program on disinformation at the elementary level. And I think that, if those kind of programs can, like take hold in different places, that can have a lot more power, especially when your kid comes to you and says, Ma, what are you looking at? Like, you're wrong. Like, if you really look, my teacher showed me. That can have an effect on maybe the people that are out of the education system, their kids having an influence on them.
Yeah, absolutely. And, there are examples of where this has actually worked. So in Finland and Sweden, they've actually introduced media literacy into their, school curriculums, starting at kindergarten, so that children develop those good media consumption habits early on, that they're able to, check sources, trust media, but also verify it. And so, you're absolutely right. This is something that needs to be introduced to our children at a very early age. It should be, one of the things that I've been promoting is amongst elected officials. Elected officials and their staff should be required to take annual courses on media literacy, because they can be influenced. And if they're influenced, then they could cause much broader problems. But yeah, school curriculum, that's something that definitely needs to happen. We need to introduce that cyber, digital media literacy, all that stuff very early on. That could help save us.
Yeah, because there was a generation that kind of didn't get that. There was a transition, right, to this online world, and it's almost like as if there was a lot of people just asleep at the wheel, and nothing was really done in those years. And so there's a generation that just kind of didn't get that literacy, the way you would learn how to read a book. And know that that's a good publisher, that's not a good publisher.
Yeah.
They're not getting that kind of education, so there's a gap, right? We have like a whole generation that just didn't get it.
Yep, completely agree.
As you can see, this issue on disinformation is superbly interesting, and it can affect various aspects of our lives. I think that we need also to remain focused on. I'll let you know at the end what I would encourage all of us to do in order for this mission to be successful. But before I do so, I would just like for us to pause for 5 seconds, and for anyone who does not know how to raise his hand virtually, or did not have a chance to ask a question and wants to do so, to unmute and to ask a question. So anybody who has been trying to interject and has not yet been able to ask a question, please do so. I'm gonna just ask all of those who have already talked to pause for a second, and for us to give an opportunity to anybody that did not yet have a chance to ask a question. So I'm going to stop and ask you, so you can unmute yourself. So nobody has been trying, and I also don't see anything else on the chat. I understand that these meetings, virtual meetings, normally should not last longer than 2 hours, and even then you're stretching. But this being such an interesting topic, and we have such a knowledgeable lecture, that I think that the 2 hours passed very quickly. Before I conclude, I see one raised hand. Nadia, if you'd be, I'm leaving the floor to you.
We in the organization that I belong to, when that whole thing happened with Ukraine, the whole Euromaidan issue, there was a lot of disinformation coming out of RT. We had a group that were monitoring all the stuff that they were printing and publishing. We prepared a whole proposal. We sent it to CRTC. They did nothing. So this is to your comment, Marcus, that you were saying CRTC is reluctant to do anything, and which is true, because we had facts that we prepared for them and they simply did nothing. What is behind that?
That's a good question. I mean, they're very reluctant to respond to complaints that have been sent by Chinese pro-human rights organizations. I think that the CRTC, much like other policymakers in Canada, they're reluctant to act. They're happy to just let things go. The other thing about RT is that, I mean, that we don't have the same sort of regulations as the UK does. The CRTC can't necessarily just remove a license. They can delist channels, and that's something they should be doing with RT. But again, they seem to be very reluctant to do that. I would add that what we should be doing as part of this monitoring project is urging our home governments, if we're in Europe, or if we're in the UK, or again in Canada, is to follow the US example. I sent a link to the US Treasury press release from last month, where they placed sanctions on four platforms, disinformation platforms. We should be doing the same thing here. I mean, in Canada, we haven't even placed sanctions on Yevgeny Prigozhin. Yevgeny Prigozhin is this Russian oligarch who's very close to Vladimir Putin. He's known as Putin's chef because he owns a large catering company. He's the individual who is Russian interference in the US presidential election. He's interfered in countless European elections. He is now trying to interfere and manipulate African politics. And he's also behind the Wagner mercenary group, who I think every Ukrainian knows very well from their activities in Donbass, in Syria, and now in Africa. He's being placed on he's being placed on the EU, US, and UK sanctions list, but he remains off of our sanctions list. And he's one of the I think one of the most important players when it comes to Russian disinformation. But the Canadian government still doesn't seem to want to sanction him for some reason. I was watching Alexei Navalny's chief of staff. He was testifying in our standing committee on foreign affairs last week, and the parliamentary secretary in that hearing said, in response to a question about why we haven't placed sanctions on Prigozhin, he said that we don't sanction criminals. So I think at least in Canada, there's just simply a reluctance to do anything to defend human rights, certainly to combat disinformation. And that's something that needs to change. And I would urge all of you to try and advocate for them to do much more beyond just monitoring disinformation, but using the tools that we have, like sanctions and the CRTC, to stop them.
Thank you very much. Unless somebody still wants to put one final word, I will be concluding. I don't see anybody raising their hand or unmuting themselves. So I will first thank on behalf of everyone that has attended this English training session of our mission, Marcus Kolga, for a very interesting presentation and for having organized this presentation in a fashion where it was really interactive, and he gave enough time for all of us to be able to ask questions and to discuss with him the various issues. I also thank Marcus very much for having accepted to be a consultant of our mission. As you can see, with his knowledge and expertise, we will certainly benefit from his support, and I thank him very much for this. I encourage all of our monitors, both and members of our mission, both those that are online and those that will be listening to this on YouTube, to look at the notice that I've sent on May 8th. There's a lot of things that we're asking you to do, one of which is to send to our NGO address. And while I'm talking, Andrew, if you could be kind enough to post the website of NGO Ukraine 2050 and the link to that website. I'd just like to point out something on the media aspect. But coming back to the notice, one thing that we're asking is for everybody that has been on this live online training session to send to our email address that's provided in the notice a simple email confirming that you've attended, and the same thing applies to everyone who will have looked at the YouTube this online training. We simply want to ensure that every single member of our mission has either attended a live session or seen later on YouTube either our Ukrainian or our English online training for members of the mission. So that is the first confirmation that I would very much appreciate that you sent to us. Second, as I've mentioned, we have provided a list of websites and other links that we would like monitors to monitor. We've asked that you review this list and to send us the links that you will be willing to monitor so that we could cover all of them. We have a lot of members in this mission, so we certainly can cover a lot of ground. Third, I would ask you very much, so you have on chat, you have the link that Andrew Mazapa has posted to our website. And as I've indicated, anything that you missed, and I would invite you from time to time, just in case emails sometimes have a way of disappearing when we accidentally delete them, or there could be a computer glitch. I would invite you on a regular basis to go to our website And if you open it, there's a section called Media. And under Media, we are posting all of the relevant information regarding the mission. So please visit it. And I would very much appreciate, I think that there's a lot of us, there's 160 monitors. It is very time consuming for the organizers to have to send 2, 3, 4 reminders in any organization for people to do things. This is basically wasted time for organizers of the mission that could be doing constructive work, helpful for the purpose of our mission. And that essentially means that we all need to be disciplined. And if we ask you, for instance, to confirm that you've attended one of those missions so we can track and ensure that everybody has gone through that, well, if you answer the first time and if all of you answer, it's much easier, and we're not wasting time sending a second and a third reminder to ensure that everybody has done so. So I would very much appreciate for you to keep in mind that it's a voluntary mission, and the discipline of all ensures that everybody's time is being used constructively instead of doing a very useless administrative work that's caused simply by a lack of discipline of our monitors. The other issue that I wanted to ensure that I've mentioned in the Ukrainian training is that you are monitors, you're not detectives. So you do not have to necessarily find anything. For us, it is very important. As I've said, we're covering over 50 countries in 40 languages. It is very important also for us to receive your reports as to what you're monitoring. And if you advise us that you're not picking up anything, that is also useful information. So please be aware that, as I've said, you're monitors, you're not detectives. We're not asking you to find this information. We're asking you to monitor and to report if there is this information, and that is the work that we need to do. The next thing is that we're not going to convince, like Marcus has said, we're not going to convince everybody that the world is round. And the purpose of this mission is not to ensure that we've convinced everybody that it is. I think the purpose of the mission is to be able to monitor this information regarding Ukraine and the Ukrainian diaspora. We know that Ukraine is the target of Russian hybrid aggression. I call it hybrid because it is not just military aggression in the Donbass. It is the illegal occupation of Crimea. It is the use of cyber attacks. It is the use of terrorist activities. And it is the use of a very powerful disinformation machine. And we need to address these issues. We need to address them in an intelligent manner so we do not get exhausted or frustrated, and that we end up doing something that is useful. At times, as Marcus has pointed out, we will receive your reports and monitor them further and simply ignore. And that is not because we're ignoring you. We are ignoring that particular material because we will have concluded, rightfully or wrongfully, that it is in the best interests for us not to highlight something and to let it kind of die of its own slow death. In other issues, we will be debunking, we will be reporting on these issues. We will not be. So if you send a piece of material and you do not necessarily see that in our report, it does not necessarily mean that we've missed it. It means that we have incorporated that in order to explain a story that's being told and that we are debunking. And it is not, and that story is a sum of the various disinformation materials that we have been picking up from your reports in various languages from various countries. So your reports and your information is very valuable, but it will not be addressed necessarily by an article to each piece of this information, because that is not the most effective way to counter disinformation. At the end of the day, we're fighting an uphill battle. Let's make that very clear. We're fighting a battle where people that want to disinform have an agenda regarding Ukraine. The agenda is very simple. The agenda regarding Ukraine is to demonstrate to the Western world that Ukraine is a failed state and that one should simply let it go. Forget about the fantasies of Ukraine's European integration, about the Ukraine's Euro-Atlantic integration, and let it slowly slide back into the fold of Russian influence and then eventually Russian control. That is what we're fighting. There's a substantial amount of money that's being invested in order to disinform, and I'm asking all of us to do our utmost to help. At times, it could be, one can be frustrated with either the fact that we see that some of our efforts are not bringing immediate results. But I assure you that the sum of our efforts, the efforts of people like Marcus and other organizations that are working in order to counter disinformation, ultimately we will win this war. And the war of information, that is a very important component of our daily activities today. So I encourage all of you to remain focused, to ensure that we're addressing the issues that this mission is meant to address, which is to address disinformation against Ukraine and the Ukrainian diaspora. And we will be shortly concluding our organizational work. We wanted to ensure that everybody has been given the opportunity to follow an online training in Ukrainian and in English. So we have done today the English component. We have people in various time zones. Not everybody is this, for some people today, right now, is in the middle of the night. So we will give at least 1 week to everyone to be able to view this online training on our YouTube channel. And then we will shortly, I certainly we're targeting to officially announce the start of our mission. You will be obviously informed in advance. We will be making a press conference to launch the work of our mission. And once that is launched, I invite you to then monitor closely what you undertook to monitor and to use the online forms to send us your reports. And finally, we don't possess all the information, and we certainly count on your insight, on your help. There's a lot of you during the work that we have done since January that have made various suggestions that have tremendously helped this mission be a better one for it. So I encourage you also to continue exchanging with us. I think that that is very important. We certainly take into account your recommendations, your suggestions, and they're more than welcomed, and they certainly help us in being more effective in accomplishing the goals of this mission. So once again, thank you for your participation. Marcus, thank you for a superb presentation. We will be shortly advising you of the official launching of the mission, and that's when you get to work in order to accomplish the objectives of the mission. Thank you all, and have a nice weekend, or whatever is left of that weekend, depending on where you are.
Thanks. Bye, everyone, and thank you for doing this important work.
Bye. Thanks a lot, Marcus.
Thanks, Marcus. Thanks, Evan. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. And yeah, let's go. Bye-bye.